Thank you to everyone who's come here today to listen to this presentation. Look, I have two rules of thumb which are pretty simple, and I'm breaking both of them today. One of them is never speak to a group that knows a lot more about a topic than you do. And there wasn't a lot I could do about that except not come. I just wanted to say the expertise and knowledge in the room is formidable, and I've really enjoyed listening and sharing with all of you here this morning. The other rule of thumb is never, ever, ever speak after Tom Friedman. But there wasn't I didn't have a lot of choice in that matter, and I just wanted to say, Tom, you've inspired me throughout my life in multiple areas, and I really appreciate what you had to say this morning, including the open-ended question at the end of it, which is the one I think that we all need to reflect on and start finding adequate answers to as we move forward. Look, this session is about building the infrastructure for success. And I think that's clear enough what we'll be talking about. I maybe just start with a couple of brief reflections on this before we invite the speakers in. Look, John Donne once said that no man is an island. And I can't think of a better way to set this discussion in motion than with that thought. Because what we're talking about today is not just what happens in laboratories. It's also what happens outside of them. It's about the infrastructures that we can build, the programs that we can put in place, the communities that we can build, the way that we reach out to people and involve them in our achievements, in our findings, and socialize those things. The regulations. It's really a very widespread all-society movement, and I'm delighted in particular with, of course, the recent Google DeepMind Nobel citation, because if that was not only a celebration of science and what technology can do, but it was also an extraordinary collaboration involving organizations, some of which you know here in this room. The European Molecular Biology Laboratory did a tremendous job curating data. And I'm just wondering if science in the future isn't just going to be about discoveries in the laboratory. Obviously not. It's going to be about how well we work together to realize them and spread them and share them. Look, we have a very distinguished panel with some very unique experiences in this area. I started out with John Donne, "No man is an island." Lovely quotation, but a little bit out of date and a little bit out of fashion. So perhaps I'll try a more modern version of it. Hillary Clinton wrote a book called "It Takes a Village." And it's that village that I would like to talk to today. What do we need to do to make that village a happy, equitable, well-run, well-managed, fair? I could come up with a dozen other words that we could put in it. How do we make the village in which we live a happy place? Both one that drives the scientific discovery, which is first and foremost what we're here about, but make sure that it's there for all to share. And Professor Berhe, maybe I'll start with you. You have a phenomenal track record. You've done enormous amount of things in this area to reach exactly those goals. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll dive in with some questions a bit later.
Great, thank you. So let me start by saying, obviously, we're at an inflection point. Advances in AI and across many, many areas in science and technology are proceeding at an incredible pace, which I think is also an important time then to think about how can we make sure that we don't repeat mistakes of the past, especially with science and technology. And how do we make sure that we are not leaving a certain segment of the human society behind and expanding the digital divide even further because of these new innovations in AI and other things that we're creating. And that has to come from multiple ways. Of course, there is human resource development type of questions that we can ask, making sure that the resources and opportunities for people to take advantage of this, we talked about this today earlier, of AI and other systems is available. But to me, it's also important to make sure that we're not just making a certain segment of the society or certain parts of the world users of the technologies that the other part creates, but how do we make sure that the ability to create the tools in the first place is available, the opportunities for education and expanding, kind of avenues for discovery is shared by all as much as possible. So how do we do better in that respect, I think is very important. And the other part to me is how do we make sure that a certain segment of society, again, does not continue to suffer even more so because of these advances and discoveries. And there's nothing, I think, when it comes to AI that brings this concern more than the energy demand and the resource demand of AI and these pretty large computing systems that we're all depending on and really, really eager to expand. And so I want to kind of make this a call of action that is not just for certain people who work on the earth and environmental side of things or policy or sustainability, but I think it's critical that all of us think about the efficiency here, the sustainability of these technologies. Because if we don't do that, right, even if, say, kind of AI companies that are involved in this space obviously are investing a lot in renewable energy, and hopefully that will spur more and more, kind of faster transition away from fossil fuels. But is that enough?
Right.
Because is that driving, the reality is more access to these opportunities means more people using them. And so it's not going to be enough to just create a small amount of renewable energy or a small incremental increase in sustainability. It actually has to lead to a transformative change in the way we use these systems, we design them, and really think. And the office that I used to lead until recently, that's a major part of how we thought about investing in the next generation computing. Is that how do we make sure that they break all the kind of everything that we think is possible in terms of sustainability. Many years ago, over a decade ago now, when the Office of Science invested in the exascale computing project that launched the exascale era of computing in the U.S., there was an explicit sustainability goal in there. Many people thought that could not be achieved. That was an unrealistic goal that was set for political purposes. But guess what? We achieved those. And those sustainability goals were achieved, and I think we need that kind of ambitious goals right now to start this.
Thank you. Before we move on to our other panelists, let me just follow up briefly with a question. Because you led some extraordinary pioneering projects in your time in government, could you say a few words about those concretely, not just the theory behind it? Tell us exactly what you did, because I think that those stories might be of use to people in the room.
Yeah, so there's a lot in that energy efficiency, but there's maybe one that I could talk about. A fairly new project that we launched in the past year is something called a high-performance data facility, which is in recognition of the fact that the Office of Science National Scientific User Facilities produce way more scientific data than any other entity in the world. So there's massive amount of data generated from whether it's particle accelerators, light sources, the genomic facilities, the chemistry facilities, materials, everything you can imagine, right? The national user facilities. So an innovative project that was just launched is to really rethink about how do we take advantage of all this data, move it around to where it needs to go, make it accessible for real-time AI and other computational applications, and do it in a way that democratizes access to this data. So federal funded research is already open access, but do it even more accessible to a lot more people, and also get it to the high performance computing facilities in an efficient manner so that it could be used for AI and other things. So there's a lot of kind of efforts of this sort that were launched. I think we need to make sure that those kinds of things continue even at an accelerated pace.
Right, and provides the data in a language that people can understand and use,
Yep.
and preserves the integrity of the data, including privacy and other things.
Yep.
It's a big challenge, but I'm glad you took it on. Professor Tijani, we quite often at meetings that I host, we have what we call a frequent flyer award, which is the person who traveled the longest way to be with us. Ordinarily, I would give it to you, but I happened to bump into my friend Peter Gluckman in the audience a moment ago, who, for those of you who don't know, is the former science advisor to the Prime Minister of New Zealand. So, Peter, you get the frequent flyer award. But Minister Tijani, you're on the panel. Tell us a little bit about how you see these problems and these issues from Nigeria. And not just what your vision is, although we're interested in that, but what you've done about it, what concretely as a minister, how you move into society and give us this infrastructure to create good social outcomes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul. And I think I have to start by appreciating Tom for the picture you painted, because this is something that became my reality when I became minister in Nigeria. You know, the fact that when you look at science ranking, of countries in the world, and you compare this to economic development and growth, you can see direct correlation, literally direct correlation. But you find that in Global South, you don't see strong application of science in actually trying to address many of the challenges that we face. You talked about high-dimensional problems. I think I saw wicked problems as well in my country and quite a number of countries in Africa. You know, these are problems where we think we already have the answers to them, but the reality is that the answers and the requirements for addressing these problems are constantly shifting. So you can't necessarily take that answer that we think we have on. For instance, if you take how the UK managed to get to a point where quality of education is at where they would like it to be, that's not something you can transplant to Nigeria, where a country that is adding 5 million new people every year, you know, literally with certain spaces that you can't govern, you know, because those spaces are just not connected. So you have to be thinking of new ways of actually solving that problem. And even what we knew 10, 15 years ago about fixing education in Africa is not the solution today. And for me, I think that's where science is extremely important. And whilst we may not have invested enough in building the base for science, I think artificial intelligence offers that unique opportunity for us to now be able to, you know, get more insight and be able to process this insight in manners that can aid how government is looking to solve these problems. But the challenge we have, despite that, is the fact that we're living in a world where the development of AI in itself is quite skilled. And we understand nations have invested over the years. So the challenge is, for me, how do I accelerate government effort to ensure that whilst the investment may not be there, that the things that we need to do at the minute to quickly accelerate how AI can help us through development, that we don't leave them behind. And I find three things that I think are extremely important that the world should actually pay attention to when it comes to AI and Global South. And the first one for me is inclusion in dataset, right? If we have this fantastic opportunity around how science can help us do what Tom was talking about with the farmers in India, but if the data set that we have is not really inclusive enough to actually tell us the reality of countries like Nigeria or Ghana or Rwanda, then we're going to limit how science can actually help to solve these wicked problems, which we all need to address. Because as much as Europe may be aging in population, countries in Africa, my country, the average age is 16.9. This country is growing at 5 million people a year. That's going to be one of the sources of talent in future. The workforce of the future will come from Africa. So we need to help strengthen that, in my own opinion. So I think that gap in inclusion in AI datasets will limit how artificial intelligence can support science to help us accelerate development. The second one, which I think is important, and we all talk about infrastructure, is also the fact that infrastructure will lead to two things from what we're seeing. One is agitation for data sovereignty, which means countries will start to say, we want to be able to keep our data. We don't want you to collect, harvest, and take them away. And what we get with that is also the limitation that will bring to helping us to strengthen AI to be able to do what we want it to do. And the other part is also the science in itself. The development of science and how it affects economic growth is not just linked to what is done elsewhere and what you bring in. It's also the ability of local scientists to be able to participate. So if they don't have access to this infrastructure, it means we cannot also encourage local scientists to actually do context-based research activities that can help to also lead development. So that's something I find quite troubling that I've been working on. And the third part for me is also the fact that a lot of what is known about us is not coded in a manner that AI can actually use. Right. So we have too much dark data on a lot of Global South nations that we need to be looking for smart ways to digitize what is known so that we can make them available and they can help us deepen the quality of most models that people now use to come up with solutions to challenges. So I think these three things broadly are things that I'm worried about. What we've done is to not focus on the limitations of our reality at the minute, but also say to ourselves that we live in a connected world. Nigeria as a country has a strong diaspora community. So we actually use an AI model to find all Nigerians working in artificial intelligence we took all the publications, I think, for the last 30 or so years in AI, and we use a name library to find those. And it's extremely accurate. So we brought about 100 of them to Abuja to actually help us craft our national AI strategy. We took in civil society folks, researchers locally, and they worked together for a week to build our foundation. And that foundation is now what we're building on as a nation to shape the direction of artificial intelligence in the country. The other thing we're doing as well is we're now building what we call the AI Trust, which is more of the, building a community of trustees, folks who can support how AI develops in the country, not just leaving it to the capacity of government, because this is also a big issue. In global South countries, most governments are playing to catch up with AI. If you come to Europe, even in countries where you may not have the leadership from government, you have academic institutions that are articulating where society should be going around AI, so government in a way is playing catch up. But I think we're getting there. There's more conversation and inclusion in conversations like this. But whilst we may still be far from actually ensuring that we can include those voices, help understand this reality, and collectively start to partner towards addressing them, I think we're still far from where we should be. But we're on the journey.
Well, that's fascinating. You mentioned the question of talent, including the enormous number of young people, 16 years old, that you have in Nigeria. And I know from speaking to you ahead of this meeting that you're making efforts to attract talent to Nigeria as a competence center in this particular area. Could you say a few words about that? Concretely, what are you doing in those areas? And I know you have a background as the founder of the co-creation hub of Nigeria. It's an area that I'm personally very interested in as well. What are you doing to attract talent and also crucially to support it? You mentioned that word too, not just have people, but allow them to develop in the way that they can. And
absolutely. I think, Paul, the challenge for us is in helping to develop the talent. I think because we're quite youthful, extremely driven people, Nigerians. So we do know that the passion is there for people to be part of the global economy. So when I was appointed, the first thing we did was we actually started a talent accelerator program that is focused on training 3 million technical talent. We think it's the largest in the world at the minute, and the government is heavily invested in that. I think Google is also supporting us, particularly on the artificial intelligence aspect of it, and we're getting local companies to invest in it. And the goal really is to recognize the fact that you can't leapfrog the application of technology in any society if you don't have the workforce to back it. I think for us, that's the first thing. The second is that there's shortage in technology workforce globally. Across Europe, you go to countries like Germany. I think the chancellor came to Nigeria, and it was quite clear about the fact that there was massive talent gap in Germany, and Germany is open to people coming in. So we'd also like to become a net exporter of talent as well. So if we can train 3 million people, perhaps keep 50% of them locally to help us power our economy. The goal is that we can export the remaining 50%. And I think India is a perfect example of a nation that has done this really well.
That's quite a vision. Maybe later in the conversation we'll come back to the question, how can we help? Fabian, I'm sorry, Professor Dr. Fabian. Respect. Lots of it. You have led several advanced projects here in Europe, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that, about these projects you lead and what breakthroughs you are hoping and you still think they might yield. But then let's look at the larger picture. They operate in a context. What do you need to succeed? How can we help people like yourself, institutes like the one you lead, to deliver success and good social outcomes for the rest of us?
We heard a lot of points here already, but I think in the end, a lot of us scientists are driven by natural curiosity. I think you saw this sort of all the time this morning at stage, right? So in order to sort of bring all these elements together to make that succeed, you need to have that environment. I guess if you want to be sort of very naive, I think the holy trinity, if you want to call it, of AI, right, is data, compute, and then sort of that algorithmic parts. And these things sort of come together in various ways to then create that wave. And in computer vision, this was already 10 years ago because ImageNet was there. Now we're sort of a bit later, and we see AlphaFold. And one thing we are sort of pushing forward now with this potential new era of foundation models is to build now a representation of cell biology. This is, I think, a potentially quite exciting moment in time because those data sets, for example, in the OC of the Human Cell Atlas, it really tries to. And I think sort of organization-wise also quite interesting, a sort of very sort of broad, inclusive type of approach to get data sets from across the world into sort of big representations first. so really just databases, but then also sort of make them build into one big model. In order to build that model, right, you need to have the data sets, but then you also need to have sort of the algorithmic aspects to emerge and sort of reduce this variation across the data sets. I think Pashmit sort of in the morning, right, was mentioning already self-supervised learning. This was stuff that the community in CompBio has been talking about for decades. Data integration, multi-scale modeling, these things have been out for a long time. But I think, quite frankly, maybe data, but also model haven't been really there yet to bring all of that together. But now, I think we're really at one of these how did Tom call it, tipping points, right? Where we could potentially now really start building one such model. And this model, of course, could, by the way, I think a very nice also diversifying effect, because those are typically then broadly served and really sort of bring that world-class knowledge that's encapsulated in these models into people like across the world, and they can build upon that. In order to make that happen, obviously talent is a key thing, and I'd be happy sort of to discuss a bit later about that, also what we've been doing here, because we don't have 5 million people coming every year again. And I do get the point about sort of education, maybe sort of these academic institutions being here, but that's sort of a really crucial point. I think one of the reasons I went to Helmholtz and not to sort of one of these sort of other places such as Max Planck, which is a bit more encapsulated, is this interaction point. I think the type of talent and type of people that we need is people that have this expertise both in the data but also in the algorithmic part, sort of to speak these languages. So you need to enable that. So that's that part. I mean, compute, I think that's an obvious one. We're not yet sort of on that LLM scale, but I think the type of compute that we inherently use and need, and I think Asmeret, you have a lot of expertise in large-scale compute, right? I mean, it's getting in that direction. And if you now want to make it equitable, right? Not everyone has a bunch of GPUs at their home, right, or at the research institutions. So we've been heavily investing into that, but then to roll it out, I think that's where these sort of academic industry partnerships become a big role. But maybe just to wrap that point, so for Human Cell Atlas, we've been really trying to build the next sort of integrated model. You can call it a virtual cell that then answers to a whole bunch of perturbations, potentially supporting academics to plan the next experiments. We spoke this morning about lab in the loop, I think has been mentioned a few times, but then also to use these models to then, potentially map disease on top of it and see where it goes, to understand these perturbations on top of this. And I think these models will be able to deliver that.
Good, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about the Deep Cell project that you lead? And just mindful, you're speaking to a room full of scientists, so hit us with it.
Yeah, appreciate that. You should never give a scientist like the opportunity to talk so long about their own project, but I'll be
keep it short.
I'll be consistent.
Keep it short.
So it's so what we aim to do is not just build a sort of computer representation of a cell with its steady state, but then sort of add temporal and particular perturbational behavior on top of that. And that sounds sort of a bit abstract, but if you think about it, we talk about the breadth of applications. I think you saw this morning what DeepMind is working on, right? And I think in a sense, in physics, like if I throw a ball over there, I could calculate where it would go. So I do have some laws of motion. Of course, I can recover them from data, but I think you saw this in structural biology, but I think cell biology will be the next thing. We don't have that type of basic equations. What are they? Can we discover them from the data? Well, in Deep Cell, what we try to do is we add multiple omics levels, but put cells also into tissue context and add image-based observations to disciplines that are very separate into sort of one bigger data structure. We have a lot of ways how to do the basic infrastructure for that, but now we can put them into sort of a bigger model. Thereby, first supporting our experimental partners to plan next experiment, but then also to work together with computational pathologists or something, or people sort of in that direction that really get clinical data in, and then see, what is sort of the shape, the organization of my tissue, helping what is diagnosis, but then potentially also a perturbation to bring cells back on the right track of sort of a healthy cell.
It's fascinating, and it sounds very promising as well. But to return to my original remarks, no man is an island. How can the community outside of you facilitate research of the type that you're discussing? And I don't just mean how, but what is the best way? Because there's 100 different things people can do. What would you like to see from the community around you in this field?
I think one important thing is really large-scale data sets that are time-resolved and perturbational, that are happening often in very isolated places but can be brought together. And there we are a bit in the lucky situation that our genes are sort of usually called the same thing, whereas, in maybe other settings, it might be sort of maybe country blended if you have geospatial data or things like that. So you have ways of putting all these data sets together. But what I would like to see community, in addition to producing these data sets, is then sort of to agree on a set of benchmarks and metrics that, you had in CAST before. We've been running at NURBS, I think, for the past 4 years, a data science competition where you sort of bring in the community to work on these tasks, but they're not as hard to put down, so we need to expand these metrics. We need to put in more data sets, and we need to get more attention to these competitions. And that's, by the way, also I think a nice equalizer, because young talent from all around the world is then going to these and then sort of taking the next step.
And create a common language where we can all
Absolutely
talk to each other, as I said earlier, without losing the integrity of the data. Professor Berhe, I know you've worked very hard in your work over the years in making sure that there's an inclusion line there. How does one do that, apart from bold statements at conferences? How do you actually bake that into the kind of work that we're talking about here?
I think the bottom line is resources, right? Genius is scattered all over the place, as some might say. Access to resources and opportunities is not. And simply speaking, I think that is the most important thing we have to do, is access to resources and opportunities. And this is important for many reasons, including what the minister stated earlier, right? Is a very important issue now. We have powerful computational systems that could do a lot of things, but the data that they're based on is not just incomplete, but sometimes even biased across multiple kind of axis of diversity that you can imagine in very not helpful ways. We've learned a lot of lessons in the health sector about what happens when we base our knowledge on very, very biased data sets. And the thing we do not want to do going forward is repeat those mistakes. So how do we critically invest in actually filling in data, training in, and we can't obviously export, kind of people from the north to go to kind of to the global south and continuously extract data and information. There has to be a real kind of cooperative investments here to actually develop the talent, homegrown talent in the global south, with people who understand the context and can work with the local context. This is true for many things, whether it's agriculture or food production, whether it's application of health to health-related challenges, or addressing climate-related challenges, for example, in many parts of the world. So I think it's extremely important that we're really thinking about how do we make sure that the resources that people need to advance and to develop the tools and the critical tools and also the data that we all need and depend on, how we do better in that respect.
Good, thank you. Dr. Tijani, I promised you already a follow-up question, and I'll make it now. I said now 2 times, I think this will be the 3rd, no man is an island, but no country is an island either.
Absolutely.
And my question to you is, how can we help you realize this dramatic vision for Nigeria, knowing full well how important the technology will be in the future, how much talent there has to be in a country with so many young people, hardworking? How can we help you deliver? How can we help Nigeria deliver on this vision?
I think the starting point, again, really, Tom did a fantastic job setting the scene for this. And I think you mentioned how we should all recognize that we're at an exciting time. And we are literally changing the trajectory of where things will go for all of us together. I think Global South, we must see it as not just a charity case when it comes to AI, because we've created this amazing thing that can actually help us build a future that we'll all be excited and proud of. And it won't happen if we don't drive that inclusion. If you're building stuff that is excluding a country like Nigeria that is going to be 500 million people in 2050, for instance, based on projection, then what are we building? Especially in a world where we're now extremely connected. You can't. It's not a charity case. I think it's business. It's a strong business case. That's a country where I'm spending time with. We're investing about $2 billion in laying 90,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable. These countries are becoming more and more connected, probably even more connected in terms of how people use connectivity more meaningfully than many countries in global north. And what you're going to see is that artificial intelligence will become a stronger part of it's already the case with everything we do in that part of the world. And we don't want a future where we still see division at the level of a technology that can influence how you think, what you think, how you do your daily chores and jobs and things like that. So I think it's a clear business opportunity. So for me, it's the starting point that we need to now start to articulate. What's the model for investing in countries like that? It's not about taking the data out, like Professor mentioned. It's about how can we build the capacity of people locally? How do we empower these young people? They don't have to travel to Europe to start to create meaningful, life for themselves. You're seeing nations in Africa that are also now becoming progressive, where people want to stay and live. But we need to create the opportunities for them. So for me, I think that's one thing that we need to do urgently. The second is that as we talk about this, we also need to be aggressive around digitization of data. I mentioned that earlier. That's not moving fast enough. Can it become cheaper? Can we see more technologies that can actually hit that process? Because as we do that, we're only helping to strengthen this technology that I think all of us will benefit from eventually. So taking that approach is what I see. What we're doing locally is also thinking as far as saying, if government doesn't have the resources to start investing in infrastructure, what's the world where we can actually do a better job at documenting our data and perhaps find a monetization strategy where the trust can actually monetize the data set for the country, and whatever comes out of it can be invested in infrastructure to support local development of artificial intelligence. And lastly, what I'll also say that I've seen that is popular for those who are invested is also the need to invest in government capacity to actually understand and set agenda for artificial intelligence. I think in Global South, this is extremely important. We don't have the luxury that you have in Global North, where you have all these academic institutions that will still do the thinking. We don't have that. And you need government. So where government is not available, you can turn to the university, to the research labs. But in Global South, I think we need to accelerate understanding of AI by government.
Okay, thank you, Fabian. You're the only European on the panel here now, and I wanted just to mention that in passing, but also to ask you a question concretely about how these issues cut in Europe. Do we have the right balance? Do we have the right ideas about the future and regulation and this and other areas? And let me maybe put the question differently. Rather than criticizing European policy, what I'd like to hear from you is what we should be doing, what we need to do right, what we need to get right in coming months, years, weeks, decades, and even centuries.
Yeah, let me not get into GDPR.
Exactly. Okay.
I think you mentioned it, talents. I think there's a lot of capacity. There's this, I think, fantastic academic landscape that we have the pleasure and honor of being able to collaborate and work with. But, for example, within Helmholtz, I see this, that we have all these different disciplines and, you have the ambition to sort of bring AI everywhere, right? And
right.
We call it as our mission, democratize access to AI. And I think that sort of principle we set up there, I think could be sort of shining a bit differently. So you have these developed disciplines, they have data sets, in this case, often a bit more organized already, but then they sort of see this thing still as a bit of a mystic thing, right? So we've been, I think maybe 5 or 6 years ago, sort of started with that mission. And one of these ideas we had there was really sort of combine research teams with also really consulting and teaching efforts, sort of bring people, sort of get them easy access to tools, go into the labs, help them accelerate that. And I think that's what because of this sort of existing infrastructure of fantastic data, but also sort of these clever people across the board, we can already push. So now what is needed is that vision to really then embrace that AI, sort of not be sort of having this beautiful English term Angst, which in German know how to deal with, but actually embrace it and take it to the next level. And I think people start really realizing that. So we used to have these boundaries between medical people sort of sitting in there, how do you call it, fiefdoms, right? Yeah. I think this is being broken up now massively, and of course a big part is the people that are pushing this.
Well, I'm very interested in what the three of you said, and you've said many very interesting things. But one of the things I'm really struck by has been that the thread and the theme of data has been right there in every single one of your presentations. I didn't get an earful from you about compute, although we all know we have that need and we need more of it. You all said we need more reform, we need more work, we need more collaboration in data and data building, building data sets, good data sets, making sure that that side of the business gets the attention. the care, the duty of care that it needs. So I won't offer any concluding remarks, but I will simply say that you fascinated me because you answered the question in a different way than I expected. And on that note, let me just invite all of you to thank my wonderful panelists and Hannah to come back on stage.